follow the news closely, Senegal have seen a wave of protest in recent weeks that have left at least 16 people dead and show no signs of debating. Now, given the fact that today this nation is standing at the crossroads, particularly related to the current political atmosphere and under the current President Macky Sall, that again, based on the report, rumor has it on the street that he was intentionally seeking the third-term presidency for the year of 2024. However, despite the ongoing protest, initially he refused to cave, but recently, based on the update, that President Macky Sall claimed he no longer seeks the third term in 2024. But meanwhile, we have seen the voices and also heard the voices from the opposition leader called Ousmane Sonko. How should we understand this person, and why is this person so threatening and quote-unquote to the nation? And perhaps what about this democratic freedom in the nation of Senegal? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker. Again, if you follow our show closely, you should be familiar with Scott Morgan. Scott has been the president of the Red Eagle Enterprises since its inception in November 2012. He uses his previous experiences from serving the U.S. military to address various projects. Currently, he's based in Washington, D.C. Again, I discovered Scott's latest article is called Senegal Protests, What's at Stake? Well, Scott, and welcome back to The Missing Piece.
Thank you, my brother. It's a pleasure to speak with you as always.
Absolutely, Scott. Again, we are very excited about our discussion regarding nation of Senegal. Again, as we mentioned before, I want to start it with a conversation. The ongoing protest had drawn the news headlines from the left to the right. Let me ask the simple question, Scott. How would you describe the current political status and the social instability in the nation of Senegal? And meanwhile, as an analyst, what do you make of the news that the current president of Senegal, Macky Sall, decided not to run for the third term in the year of 2024? Is this a good message for the people and also for the country? What do you say to that?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, but I will start with this. In the region right now, the decision by President Sall not to seek re-election puts Senegal at a crossroads. As you know, those who read my article realize that his political party was actually planning on him to actually run. And for him to actually decide at this time that he's not going to run, it gives him some time to develop a new candidate and focus on that. So that will be a good thing. And it's a great important thing. You also bring up the leader of the opposition, Mr. Sonko, who has faced several trials, trumped up charges on human trafficking, rape, etc. These protests actually started when he was actually convicted of a crime. And he was sentenced to 2 years in prison. He has not been taken into custody yet to serve out his sentence. So that having him out of the scene removes any viable opposition that they had to Macky Sall. So when Macky Sall deciding not to stand for a re-election in 2024, Senegal will be at a crossroads. It will have an entirely new leader. The thing is right now, we don't know who that will be quite yet. But as for Macky Sall's decision not to run, brings to the forefront another interesting trend, because we have seen several leaders, most recent like Paul Kagame, the late President Nkurunziza in Burundi, for example, that were constitutionally limited to say that they could only stand for 2 terms before they left office, but then realized, no, I want to stay in power, and then amended the Constitution so they can run again and have a 3rd term. This bucks that trend. But it also shows, Senegal, this decision by Macky Sall actually shows something about African politics that very few people have actually mentioned yet. For whatever reason, the regional bloc known as ECOWAS has done a superb job of promoting democracy. We've seen their efforts, the restoration of civilian rule in Nigeria a couple of decades ago. That started there. We saw their role in the resolution of the Cote d'Ivoire crisis, with Laurent Gbagbo and the current president, Ottawa. We saw ECOWAS actually intervene after a controversial election in Gambia. That's the Gambia situation should also raise people's attention, because Gambia is a small sliver of a country in West Africa along the Senegal River. It is completely surrounded by Senegal. What occurs in Senegal will have a positive or an adverse effect on whatever happens in the Gambia. That is another reason, which very few people have raised at this point, why the situation in Senegal is so crucial to regional stability. But and then you look at some of the other crisis spots in Africa, the DRC, Sudan, and others, and you see regional blocs such as IGAD for the East African, the Horn. You have the SADC, the Southern African Development Community, dealing with what we call the cone from the DRC southward. Those blocs have not been adept at promoting democracy in Africa. They do not have the track record that ECOWAS does, and that would be a good paper for someone to write about and trying to determine why just this part of Africa democracy it actually is strengthened, despite what's happened with the coups in Mali and Niger. Because ECOWAS and Burkina Faso, ECOWAS has also interacted with those governments as well. So that's a great question that people should ask: is why is ECOWAS more successful at this than the other regional blocs in Africa? That would be a good for someone to write.
Indeed, Scott. And again, I want to further our dialogue. Again, as we mentioned before, it's kind of surprising that President Macky Sall decided and now to run for the 3rd term in the year of 2024. And I want to read something to you, and also let's talk about the credibility of President Sall at this moment. Now, the quote goes like this, and I quote, "Under the presidency of Macky Sall, Senegal has seen a large influx of foreign investment into new projects that, if successful, would actually increase Senegal's role in the regional economy." Now, again, Scott, you're the expert on this nation based on what you research and also what you have written. Help us with better understanding. What is the credibility of President Macky Sall during his presidency? And also, how should we interpret his success in terms of bringing foreign investment into the projects that actually boosted the regional economy? What do you say to that, Scott?
That is a great question, and it hasn't borne out yet. But the projects that are being undertaken, most people have focused. They have been developing the oil and natural gas fields that are currently offshore, and they're being shared with the Gambia. Also, most people pay attention to extracted minerals because Senegal is a decent source of gold. But the one thing that has been shows the most optimism and can actually benefit the region as a whole is the investments in the hydroelectric hydroelectric field.
Mm.
As you know, they broke ground. So within the last couple of years, Senegal has actually broken ground to build a hydroelectric dam, which will come online soon. And the plan is that they're also constructing pylons, which will actually carry the power, not only to be used within Senegal, but also with Gambia, also with Guinea-Bissau as well. So, and in a regional dynamic, the opening up the economy for Macky Sall has been good. And another importance that people haven't really paid attention to for Senegal is actually, even though that mission wraps up later this year, Dakar was one of the places ports along with Conakry where supplies to the UN going into Mali were actually entering Africa into. And Port of Dakar is actually becoming a very popular port. We've also seen investments there recently to improve the port area itself in Dakar. So actually, the vision is good. It's multifaceted, not banked on one industry as a whole. Oil and natural gas exploration, hydroelectric power, extracting minerals. And don't forget, we also had the Paris-Dakar rally as well. And with the exception of the on-again, off-again Casamance insurgency, Senegal has been one of the more stable countries in Africa, which is surprising due to its location and the proximity to other conflict zones. That has made it attractive to investors. Also attractive to security analysts and security partners. As you know, the U.S. has recently conducted, African Lion was our military exercise that the U.S. held earlier this year, and Senegal was one of the countries that hosted it. So there's a lot of people are viewing Senegal in a positive light, which is actually a rarity these days in Africa. It's one of the few countries that you can actually say that about. Offhand, other countries that we hear positive things about generally right now are Morocco, maybe even Botswana for its stability and everything, but very few countries have actually generated the positive conversations that Senegal currently creates. But then the unknown factor is, again, we don't know who will be the candidates for the presidency next year. We don't know whether or not they will continue and further along this investment strategy, which is actually bearing fruit. Geopolitics makes Senegal an important country, so Senegal will definitely be a country to watch over the next 18 months just to see how further it advances and compared to its peers.
Well, Scott, again, I agree with you 100% because we know, as you mentioned before, on the positive side, that Senegal has generated much greater economic noises in terms of seeking the foreign investment and also able to be this economic partnership with any other countries around the globe. But meanwhile, again, I want to go back to a local economic situation. One thing we know that offshore oil and gas development has been growing with one joint venture between the Senegalese state-owned petroleum company and also this Australian company called Woodside, projected to produce somewhere around $1.5 billion of revenue between 2023 and 2025, according to the forecast. Now, again, Scott, you are the expert. Help us with better understanding why this offshore oil and gas development is so rich in Senegal, since we have this economic opportunity, is really a strong message for the people and also for the current government to say we need to put someone who's more capable in the house in order to maintain stability politically speaking and also economically speaking. Even though we know that we don't know who will be the successor, but meanwhile, it's crucial for the country to elect or for the people to pick a person who can shoulder much greater responsibility. What do you say to that, Scott?
Of course, I've heard a talk show host refer to as a political campaign is nothing more than a beauty contest. Which person or entity will actually be seen as more attractive by the population for whatever reason? I think that going forward, the path that Senegal is currently on, and we should also note that also within the last couple of weeks, the outgoing government of Macky Sall has signed a deal with another rebel faction in Casamance. So actually, so Macky Sall can say, I'm, for the most part, except for the crackdowns against the opposition and the media, he's leaving Senegal in a stable environment. And that way, whoever succeeds him has a solid base to make whatever decisions that they need to make, so they can impose their agenda or actually build up what Macky Sall has done economically, which would be a huge benefit. And also, projecting stability in that region will also be paramount, because there's going to be a time where Senegal will probably drop off the radar for a bit, because as another country in the region, Liberia, is also preparing to have elections, and also and they have had a period of instability, which actually saw U.S. military intervention. But as you know, that will be like Liberia will fall under the principle of the red bouncing ball or the shiny new toy. That will get the attention by the media due to the fact that it's another country could be in transition. Will President Lay actually be reelected? That's another question and another conversation. But some people may actually look at that election as a bellwether to see how things could go in Senegal, even though it's a completely different situation.
I see that. But Scott, again, just one more question to add on. How should we understand the oil and gas development in Senegal today? I mean, does the ongoing political unrest and also this political uncertainty is going to change or impact the development of the natural resources in this country?
It should. If there's any change, that could probably come from the voters. But, unlike several other countries like Nigeria and others where rampant corruption has been rampant, and, we've seen oil smuggled out of Nigeria being used in Cameroon, Benin, and Togo, for example. That's a risk. Could it possibly happen to assist the impoverished Gambia? Question is, we don't know yet. Could it happen? Most definitely. Will it happen? That's the question. It depends on what safeguards and the mechanisms that the Senegalese currently have set in place. Whether or not there are any changes, that will be left to the next president, whoever they are, and the next parliament in Senegal. So,
Scott, two more questions before letting you go. Now, let's talk about the general feelings of the people in Senegal. Again, based on the research, how should we understand the key principle of the social stability in Senegal? Because again, based on the latest article, that people believe, and again, when I say people, I mean the Senegalese today, they're constantly living in fear, stress, exhaustion, and helplessness. So in other words, based on the ongoing protests, based on look at the social instability, people are not very confident about the direction of the country. But meanwhile, they're still hoping that someone can be legitimately elected to be the next president. Again, Scott, how do you think that people feel regarding this uncertainty? On top of that, they're feeling stress, anxiety, and also this fear, and most importantly, is this political exhaustion. What would you explain that?
Well, part of the political exhaustion, part of a lot of this can be resolved with answering one question, and then that question has already been answered. Will President Sall run for re-election or will he not? That was the biggest source of stress in the country. And now we know the answer to that. That will be no. But then now that will be, will they have the principal as the next man up? Will it be the current vice president step up and take the mantle and run as the candidate for that party? We do not know. They haven't decided yet. One of the telling facts in all of this is, even though while he had not made his decision to run, his supporters in the party were actually setting it up, assuming that he was going to run. So basically, the question is he or isn't he? Is he leveling with us? That's always a source of stress regarding any leadership. I mean, even the United States is not immune from that. But now, that's been the quote, to use an American term, the $64 question has been answered. I mean, the $64,000 question has been answered. Macky Sall is not going to run for re-election. So we know until at least the election, President Sall will be considered to be a lame duck. And we'll see if there are any new projects that will be announced besides the improvements of the port, the oil and natural gas fields offshore, the extractive, because Senegal's a decent gold mining country, as I mentioned before, and you generally don't hear that mentioned in the news as well. And another industry which Senegal is also a player in Africa, which I even overlooked in this conversation. Senegal is also a supplier of timber as well. And that has been a root cause for some tensions between the Gambia and Senegal in the past. And so now the question is what will any new tensions arise? We do not know. Will people try to exploit Senegal? Most definitely, yes. But as you know, this is going to be an election cycle in Africa that will be worth watching just to see which candidates emerge forward. And then we cannot ask the question, who's going to be better for France? Who's going to be better for the U.S.? Who's going to be for ECOWAS? Because those are the questions we'll automatically hear.
Scott, I want to wrap up our conversation by asking you the last question. Are we going to see a democratic system, or are we going to see a restoration of the democratic system in the country of Senegal? Again, as you mentioned before, the die has already been cast. That President Macky Sall is not going to be re-elected for the 2024, but meanwhile, the new president is still up in the air. But meanwhile, people in Senegal are still hoping and praying for this democratic system, or at least we can get the taste of the value of democracy. So the very simple question to you, Scott, is how much can we expect this country is going to face the restoration of democracy today? Is that still a pipe dream, or that is going to come true under the new leader? What do you think?
Well, it's kind of interesting because when Macky Sall first came to power, He was the first. He was the first ever opposition candidate to beat an incumbent in Senegal.
Mm.
And also, that I guess that is why a lot of people rightfully ask about the democracy question, because like several countries, Senegal has elections was had one party rule. But now Senegal is going to be in a position. Could his Sal's party win the election? Yes. The question is, who's the candidate? So, and the opposition with the arrest of Sango, which was most likely designed to keep him from running. The field is wide open, and generally, in some ways, that's what democracy is supposed to look like. Instead of the Republican form of government, which we often see here in the United States, somewhat in the Philippines and other places. People forget, everybody talks about democracy, but at times democracy can be messy.
Mm.
It can be unreliable. Because which begs one of the questions I've often been asked is, the U.S. talks about promoting democracy, but often the U.S. has supported like brutal military or one-party dictatorships. And I answer the question this way. I actually said, at times the U.S. prefers reliable autocracies over democracies that are unreliable, because for one, a government that the U.S. agrees with and can support can also be elected. I shouldn't say elected. Ousted by an election and then replaced by a government that the U.S. could feel hostile to, and that the people in the State Department generally do not react well to that. So I think one of the things is people are scared of the unknown. Senegal is in a position where they are at the unknown. And the question is who's going to be the leader that actually can step forward and say, I will lead us into the future. We have a good foundation. We need to do more to protect our independent media and others, but we are in a good position. We should stay the course, or I had some ideas that I want to do that we can alter. So it's going to be Senegal. It will be an interesting country to watch over the next 18 months.
Well, indeed, Scott, I agree with you that, again, Senegal is only one of the unique and irreplaceable countries on the continent of Africa. As you mentioned before, there will be more countries are gearing up for the local elections, and the election result could easily impact not only this domestic agenda, but international relationships. Well, again, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to speak to Scott Morgan. Again, Scott has been the president of Red Eagle Enterprises since its inception in November 2012. He's based in Washington, D.C., and he's the expert across the continent in Africa regarding many critical and also essential matters among the countries in Africa. Well, Scott, brother, it's always been a pleasure speaking to you, and thank you so much for your time. Again, let's keep in touch, and hopefully within the next 18 months, we are going to see some updates and at least some progress regarding the country and also the direction of the country. So thank you so much for doing this.